basically, there's this notion that there is some kind of an author to, not only in film, obviously, but in other arts and other media. But there's one particular author, it's called, in the past it was called the auteur theory, the French auteur theory, which many people embraced. And I think a lot of people still do think that that the director, let's say, is the ultimate author or authority on a film. And I think that's really depends on the film, it depends on the producer, it depends on the director, really. For example, in Hollywood, because it's such an industrial, I'll say this again, an industrial process, often more and more, even on mega budgeted films, the director's role is really reduced. Their role is just as a technician who puts people in place. It's not, and often they're very young directors because, frankly, that the producers can pay them less money. But they're technically adept of putting these kinds of films together. In the past, that wasn't so. I mean, the director was maybe a little bit more involved with the overall creative process and the writing and the pre-production. Now that's changed a bit. There's already, I'll talk about authority and then we'll talk about the author or in terms of somebody like Walter Murch in terms of sound. As I said before, there's this hierarchy that pretty much still exists in most of the film world. And it is based on a hierarchical system or a class system, and it's a bit like a military operation, And you are, as a sound editor, as a cameraman, as an actor, as a grip, as a driver on a film, a little soldier in that army, and your job is to take commands from the generals being the producers, the directors, etc., the assistant directors, actually, a lot of the time. And the best you can do, particularly from a sound point of view on set, is listen, observe, do your job, and be a good soldier. And also always remember that you're part of the army, you're part of collaboratively together. Also, it was the great English director Terry Gilliam once said, in terms of directors and their power. He said that shooting a film, being a film director, is truly the last truly dictatorial profession on the earth. Because you're God. Basically you can get anything you want on a film set, on a certain type of film set, and you will be obeyed. Changing the subject slightly, in terms of talking about sound, our profession, much has been made about the authority of a sound supervisor, or a sound supervisor, sound designer. Sound designer is a term that came up and probably started with a true sound designer and a true genius named Walter Murch, who worked, initially he worked with Francis Coppola on many of his finest films, all the Godfather films, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now. And he did a bit of everything. He's primarily a film editor now, a picture editor. But he probably, more than anybody else, kind of created the term sound designer because he was one of the first to really think about sound as a cerebral concept and not something that was just a literal concept, that something you see on the screen is happening and we place a sound there. There was always kind of a subconscious element to what Walter did and what he thinks about with picture and sound. And he had the ability also to do both. And he worked very, very intimately with Coppola on those films, even though they were, particularly The Conversation. But the Godfather films were really, despite the fact of their success, they were very, in terms of post-production, they were very intimate films where Francis was very involved with Walter and the film editors about the shape of it. But he would essentially leave Walter alone for a long period of time and let him create something. That's particularly true in the greatest film they probably ever made in terms of sonic resonance, which is Apocalypse Now, which was really Walter Murch's brilliant ideas, in full flower, along with a squad of working professionals, really top-notch working professionals, working right at that time, they were right on the cutting edge, the avant-garde of what they were pushing in terms of what sound could be. Dolby stereo, 70 millimeter sound, surround sound. They were all pushing that, and that was 1976, 1977. And they created this amazing mix. To this day, that mix is stunning, it's spectacular. And I would say that Walter in particular, you can say that he's a type of an author. He is a type of an author in almost every film he works on, because I have worked with him on several films, and he did both. He was the picture editor, and then I sat with him at the mixing board, and we mixed together. And he had ideas that I would have never, obviously we would have never thought of. And while he was editing the film, he was thinking about the sound too. And he had ideas that he would convey to us, or just, in an improvisational way would come up with. But he really had a lot of those, the greatest scenes in these Coppola's films. Particularly, the conversation is really interesting because it's a film about sound. It's a big cheat, essentially. It's a big cheat. It's a big sound cheat, if that I can make that understood. Because the whole premise of the film is a trick, essentially, of sound. That Walter, basically, he invented it. I mean, he pretty much wrote most of the script with Coppola. He also wrote a science fiction film that they did, that George Lucas did, I don't if you recall, early in the American Zoetrope days, called THX 1138. And Walter wrote the script for that with George Lucas. And all of the sound work, to this day, it's really a fascinating film and a fascinating sound film. That was all Walter Murch. I mean, he did it alone, I think, essentially. And that was 1972 or something. No, 1970. So he's truly, every film I've been involved with him on, he has the ultimate say-so in terms of that stuff. He's now working, as I said, less as a quote-unquote sound designer and much more as a film editor and a guru, essentially, because he's being interviewed and talked about all the time, and he's involved in a number of different projects. But he's truly the one who started that. And on the other hand, that terminology I find now, the term sound designer, to be kind of overused. Everybody's a sound designer now. Everybody, and that means they're just a sound editor to me most of the time. There's a difference between designing sound or creating an atmosphere and just editing sounds, literal sounds. Everybody likes we like the sound of that. It's a designer, so it sounds more creative. But I can name a number of people who are truly, truly talented now, who worked with George Lucas. There's Ben Burt, and there's Gary Rydstrom. There's a number of women now in America who are, I think, terrific sound designers. And they really are that. They think about, they think about it cerebrally. They think about sound on a variety of different levels, not just on the literal level.